Peace and blessings, family. This is your brother asarimhotep with the Martin Delaney Center for Egyptology, and today is Kujichagulia, aka Monday, May the 8th, 2023, and this is an open forum. And so the link is in the chat at the top on YouTube. If you want to come in and join the conversation or ask a question, you do not need to show your face. Just make sure your mic is working. And we are going to get started now. And we are back, and just want to thank each and every one of you for checking us out live. I know it's in the middle of the day, and so some of you are probably at work, especially on a Monday. So I do appreciate the time that you are being unproductive at work and being productive here online with your brother. And I know it's been a minute, so get back in the game and start doing some more lives and the like, and some more presentations and some more interviews and the like. So I just wanted to say what's up. It's been a minute, and see what is going on in these internet streets, as we say. And before we get further along, I just want to shout out everyone who is in the chat room currently, or at least have made themselves known. And so peace to Sister Mika, one who is in the building, and peace to Ian. So they're just a phony, no name, just a phony, a voice nasal, in. And we have Jagad Davis is in the building, and Malikia Wamungu is in the building. Peace and blessings. Teti Ursama Ross Neferu is in the building. Thank you for joining us. Sister Julanda Zachary is in the building. Thank you for joining. And Firelight and Tist is in the building. Thank you all for joining in. All of those who are catching us from YouTube, as well as Facebook, and as well as Twitter. Thank you all for joining. And we have Learn Together with Obama is in the building as well. So I'm going to get to your questions in just a second. So I'm going to try to go in order. And so I wanted to first share. Let me just share my screen real quick. And where is... Oh, did I even... Let me get the right screen first. There we go. And all right, so there seems to be a lot of conversation around Cleopatra. And there were a number of Cleopatras, so I'm not sure which one in that everyone is having the issue with. However, apparently Jada Pinkett Smith has a Netflix special coming, where I guess she's executive producer of a Netflix special dealing with Cleopatra. And she is essentially arguing that Cleopatra has some African ancestry. Now, I do not know too much about Cleopatra and her, ancestry and the like. It's a topic that never really interests me because Cleopatra is not like a major figure in ancient Egyptian history. And so, admittedly, I don't have much information to make an argument for or nay. To me, she may have mixed ancestry, but again, it's been a hot minute since I've even looked at that data. However, an Egyptologist who we've interviewed on this program before, and her name is Dr. Sally Ann Ashton, out of Europe, out of UK. She has a blog, and what's interesting is that she has a second PhD, and I think it has to deal with like sociology or the like. And so she's kind of switched fields, from Egyptology to sociology, I believe. Uh, and, primarily because of the culture amongst Egyptologists, the sexism, racism, and just a whole bunch of other stuff. It's just, she got tired of it and decided to do a whole still dibs and dabbles in the Egyptology world. And so every now and then she will post on her blog, which is called Kemet Expert, African Centered Egyptology. And this is a European woman. So, um, and so she recently posted a blog titled The Truth About Roman Portraits of Cleopatra. And she's not necessarily addressing whether Cleopatra has African ancestry or not, or whether she's Black or not. But she wanted to address, because she's a former curator at the British Museum, I believe. Not the British Museum, which is the Asmolean Museum. She was one of those museums. But she was a curator for a museum. And so, like, this is really up her alley when it's talking about, the ancient world, Mediterranean, portraits and the like, because there's a lot of people who, in trying to attack Jada Pinkett Smith's documentary and just Black folks in general, are floating around this image that you see in the center of the screen and trying to make an argument that this is a portrait of Cleopatra. And what Dr. Sally Ann Ashton has noted is that, this is a fragment of a wall painting found at Herculaneum, Naples National Museo Nazionale Archeologica, and that, we don't know who this is. There's no labeling of who this person is. And given the date that this was probably constructed, this is way after the time, almost 100 years after Cleopatra was supposed to have lived. So this is not a portrait whatsoever. And there is no royal regalia, on her. Like, this is just like a head cloth to kind of hold the hair down. And, nothing saying that this is a royal woman. So I encourage you all to, matter of fact, let me put the link in the chat, and so y'all can read it on your own time. Here, so Boom. And so there. Hold on. So now I am going to go and see if I can address any of the comments. So let me scroll up, and I'm trying to work my way down. And so Ian says, I have something on the tangent of the Cleopatra stuff. If we say that those people were coming to what was predominantly East Africa or Habesha from those kingdoms, therefore Ethiopians, are they mixed with ancient Greek, also Ethiopians? We often speak about this influx on ancient Greece into Egypt, but not the surrounding territories. Is this why they share the Orthodox Christianity? I believe that's a good question, and I think it is best left for someone like Dr. Salim Faraji, because he's the one who really kind of deals with like Nubia and the introduction of Christianity in that area. So I'm not sure to what extent there was any, or to the extent that it's the, well, let me back up for a second. So I'm not sure to what degree the Greek genetic flow into Sudan and Ethiopia there was in those historical times. But when you're speaking of people like the Habesha, their primary mixed ancestry comes out of the Middle East. And so, those people coming out of Arabia and Yemen who settled in Ethiopia and over time have intermixed with those native folks there. And this is how you get, first and foremost, the Semitic languages in Eastern Africa in terms of Ethiopia, Somalia, and those areas, well, primarily Ethiopia. And of course, the subsequent genetic admixture. So I'm not sure that the Greeks have much, if any, genetic contribution along those lines. But when it comes to Habesha folks, that is definitely Arabia, Yemen crossover. Let me see. Yes, and Sister Tamika reminds each and every one of you to thumb up the video, to like and share, and to subscribe. So we confer with her there. So we're going to go back to Learn Together with Obama. And this person states, people argue that Christianity started in Egypt. How was the transition from Egyptian deities to Jesus? And why the Coptic Bible centers in Hebrew places instead of Egyptian? I'm not one of those individuals who argue that Christianity itself, as we understand it, was birthed in Egypt. But I do argue that Egypt had a major influence and provided the models for many of the ideas, themes, and myths that you find in the biblical text, including Jesus the Christ. So we just had not too long ago a conversation about one of those models being Osiris out of Egypt, and that relationship to the development of the Jesus myth. But I wouldn't argue, and I would have to, someone would have to educate me on who is making an argument exactly that Christianity, as we understand it, was birthed in Egypt, and what is their evidence for such a claim. Let me see. It seems y'all all got out and getting back in the game around the same time. I bet the session about to wrap back up too. Probably. And the only reason for me is because just doing a lot of transitions in terms of location, job, and then doing some other research and the like, it's just had my schedule all kind of crazy. So, hopefully this, by the summer, I'll be in a regular routine, when it comes to this. And so, I can bring more hell to the pseudos online. And let me see. Seven blessings. It was Google that gave me that name. Somehow, peace and blessings. This is Lacan. So peace and blessings, Lacan, if I'm saying that correctly. Thank you for joining us. And peace to Vyasa. Gula is in the building. And Sister Malikia asks, what is the concept of the spirit soul? And do all people, no matter their race and or ethnicity, have one according to ancient Kemetic texts? That's a very good question. And I will preference it like this. Matter of fact, let me answer that question via how should I say, via the Amazulu via Credo Mutua. And it's ironic you asked that question because I just posted something. I kind of post it every year. So let me I'm gonna reshare my screen. I just had it. So I'm going to my asarimhotep page right now. And it's going to be kind of, so let me just do this. I'm going to stop sharing here. And I'm going to open up a new tab real quick. I'm going to open up my Google Docs. Just open up and boom. So we see this here in real time. And so boom, I reshare my screen. And we're going to go to Untitled Google Doc. And so hopefully, y'all see that. There's going to be a little time delay. And so let me remove that so y'all can see. And hopefully you can see this quote here. Let me make sure y'all let me know if y'all can see this or not. Alrighty. So I'm gonna answer via this path, and then I'm gonna go back up to ancient Egypt. So I'm gonna start down south in Tanzania, aka South Africa. Then we're gonna go to Egypt. So when it comes to the Amazulu, as told to us by Credo Mutua in his text Zulu Shaman, 2003, page 18, he says, the Christians have told us that God created the soul, but our belief in Africa is a little different from this. We believe that the soul is in fact an integral part of God, and that our souls came into being when God created himself. We exist because God exists, and our souls are fragments of the universal self. And if you are not necessarily familiar with, many of my discussions regarding, what is spirit and what is soul, a brief recap will state that what you'll find that dominates across Africa is this notion that existence and reality itself is God. and it is an infinite existence. And so nothing can exist outside of the infinity. Therefore, everything is created within the infinity as an evolution or an aspect of the divine itself. So that's why, like in this particular paradigm amongst the Amazulu, he says we exist because God exists, and our souls are fragments of the universal self. Right? You are an aspect, you are a spark of this infinite being that in the English language we call God. And when you're talking about spirit, when you're talking about the soul, you're talking about that aspect of the divine that empowers that is an agent component that makes things be what they are, that animates and moves them, right? And so, the concept of the spirit and the concept of the soul, the concept of spirit is more easily ready to define in most African languages, including the ancient Egyptian. But the soul is a little bit different in terms of its articulation, because the soul, in essence, is really your name. Now, I have a book titled Umoja Volume 2, and you can pick it up on my website, or you can pick it up, which is asarimhotep.com, or you can pick it up on Amazon. And so my website is, you can see it at the bottom of the screen scrolling as we speak. And I discussed this in, I think, maybe the second or the third to the last chapter in the text. And I go through the different African groups, including the ancient Egyptian, that tells you that the soul, what we're calling the soul of a person, is really their name. And how even that plays a role in this concept of reincarnation. Because reincarnation in many African groups is really your descendants naming their children after deceased ancestors. So you reincarnate your ancestors by naming your children those names, because those names are the encapsulation of a spirit, of a kind of force, a kind of being, and you want to bring that being back. So you name your children after those people who embodied that personality, right? And so in Umoja Volume 2, I discussed that in detail, but in short, the soul is a more nuanced articulation of the concept of a spirit. But a spirit essentially is, any agent that cannot be seen, but has the ability to make things happen. It's a power, so to speak. And so, we've had mad discussions about that concept in ancient Egypt. And so there's many different words in the ancient Egyptian language for this concept. For example, the Ka, and of course, Netcher. Both of these are, in reality, these are two different dialectical variations of the same word, Netcher and the so-called Ka, but which is really the Inkra or the Okra of the Akan, for example. In Chiluba, we say Kole, right? But that K sound was palatalized. So in other languages, they'll say Ch. So that's where you get net Ch from. But in others, it's fully palatalized, and so it's T. So that's why you get Toro and Tore in many of these other different languages for the same word. But yeah, so I hope that provides some answer to your question that you just asked here. And so the second part to your question, does every ethnicity have one? By the logic of the ancient Africans, yes. Because again, God is existence, God is an infinity, and everything in existence is just simply a quantization of this infinite, sea of power, material, and materiality, right? So, regardless to how people behave collectively and individually, for the most part, and I have, no counter data to this notion. Every ethnicity, every person, has those aspects to themselves. All right. And Firelight and Tis asks, and thank you for your question, Sister Malikia. And Firelight and Tis asks, why does the conversation have to be an issue when the history is clear cut anyway? You'll have to be a little bit more specific in terms of what do you mean specifically, what are you responding to with that particular question? All right. Asar and Proof Evidence, peace and blessings to you. With the MF Doom avatar. He asks, when is your new book coming out? Hopefully by August. And I've mentioned this before, and I'll mention it again. I've also written a journal article that is currently being reviewed by an Egyptological journal on the meaning of the place name Kemet. And so I am waiting for the subsequent feedback and hopefully publishing of the text before I release the book, the book on the larger aspects of the subject. And so I want to take into account any of the feedback and critiques that is coming with the journal article that is currently under review. And I've gotten word that it is currently being reviewed. They have found some people to review it, so they are reviewing it. And so it's just a matter of waiting on their feedback. And so it's really kind of no time limit. Excuse me. That's not wholly accurate either. But I can't foresee exactly when that total experience will take. When I initially submitted the article, which was at the beginning of this year, they said that they tried to, complete the process anywhere between 4 to 6 months. So again, if that is the case, then by the end of June, maybe that I would have gotten the feedback and would have been able to submit any corrections and things of that nature. So it would probably be August, September. I'm hoping for August. The sooner the better. But that's what it's looking like at this point. And peace to Brother Richard Sheffield, who was in the building. And Vernon King is in the building. Thank you for joining us. He says, is there any progress on meteoric deciphering? I'm assuming you mean meroitic. Really interested in writings about deities. All righty. Again, I'm assuming that you mean the Meroitic script out of Kush. And to my knowledge, I don't think there has been, any significant breakthroughs in terms of the decipherment of that language. And, speaking of journal articles, I intend to write a journal article submitting, because I've already did some preliminary work in a text I released in 2020 called Towards a Chicom Dictionary. And so there's a chapter on there where I'm dealing with Meroitic, and I'm comparing it with Sumerian and ancient Egyptian. And so I want to bring it into certain circles and have it debated. So, hopefully that will help in terms of breakthroughs. But to my knowledge, there has not been any significant breakthroughs regarding that language. And let me see. Current Egyptians confidently say that Black people stole their history, but apparently they don't study their own history, or they just argue in bad faith. You really can't take most of the Arabized bots seriously when it comes to ancient Egyptian history and culture, for which they do not know. And it's a shame that they have a lot to say online, but will never agree to like a public discourse and to show their face and to go on record making their claims, right? And especially anybody who is, of the academy. See, it's one thing for like just internet trolls who work in a who work at Starbucks or something like that, or equivalent in Egypt. But who you really want are the folks who are in the Egyptology departments in those areas. They especially avoid any kind of confrontation when it comes to the Africanness of the ancient Egyptians, because they have to explain first and foremost how they got so light in color, right? And how they've forgotten all of their, for the most part, all of their culture without being, enslaved or anything to that nature. That's the biggest issue. But yeah, it's they're confident and bold because they're there on the internet. But outside of being in Egypt and wanting to have a serious discussion, they're not that bold. Let's see. Proof Evidence asks, what's your take on the historicity of the biblical Jesus Christ? Unlike our good brother Garfield, I do not believe that he was a historical person. And, they're being very academically dishonest when they have these discussions, because what they'll do is, Jesus the Christ is presented as a particular entity with a certain set of powers, with a certain lineage, et cetera, in the biblical text. What they'll try to say is, well, there was a historical person who they later deified and da-da-da-da-da. Well, that's not the historical Jesus. The Jesus wouldn't be Jesus if he was not able to, turn water into wine, and was the Son of God and was born of a virgin, in terms of the being the son of Mary, who's connected to Adam through the lineage and the like. That's Jesus. It can't be some brother that was named Tyrone, and then later on he, some people lied and gave him some attributes and a history that he did not have. That does not mean that this person existed. And I have not been convinced by any of the evidence, by any of the scholars, that Jesus was a historical person. Extraordinary claims and extraordinary evidence. And with again, they'll try to do the flim flam and be like, well, it was some regular guy, and then that was deified later on in life. But you can't find a regular guy, right? Philonians, considering how much they attack the people of Sudan, who are the original people, even going as far as building dams specifically to flood their sites that predate Egypt, but look the same, would imply that they know more than that. And they just make up propaganda to tell people otherwise, and people who don't pay attention to what they do, yada, 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 where the world is in. Consider you here by yeah, that's kind of a complex thing, but you got to remember that, modern Egypt is a kind of hodgepodge of various groups that have kind of settled in the area over time. And the current rulers of that particular land, they have an agenda and a narrative that, tries to displace the indigenous Africans because they want to have claim over the heritage of Egypt and the control. So you can't, logically at least, say that, we are the Egyptians, and then, the evidence says otherwise, but you're the one controlling access and then trying to suppress and oppress the natives who remain there. And this is exactly what is going on. And so, it's propaganda, is money involved, and then there's Islam. Islam tries to make it seem like they were the originals in that space anyway. So they have a tendency to try to, wherever they go, to erase the history of the place in which they conquered. And so that's an issue in of itself. Let me see. Okay, Michael Bernard Charlotte says, good evening. Why isn't in different languages translate? Thank you, everybody. I have no idea what you're trying to say, so I'm going to assume that English is not your primary language. And I don't know if you're talking about this program. I'm assuming that you're asking about this program. I'm not sure. Hopefully you can kind of restate it, or even say it in your native language. And let's see if we can, use Google Translate if I can't translate it to see exactly what you're saying. All right. So, oh wow, okay, we'll get the book. Appreciate you. And Brother Sheffield says, from my reading in Ifa, the Ori has a place with the concept of soul. Ori is more so a spirit itself. And that's a different discussion. That's something I have to show you, because in the Yoruba language, the Yoruba language is kind of deteriorating. And not saying this is kind of a natural evolution of some languages, to the point where, because they lost a number of syllables in certain words, they're being reduced to monosyllabic words, and that increases the likelihood of homonyms in the language. And so the concept, which is Ori, being spirit, and soul, and then Ori being head, these are two different words that merge together in the Yoruba language. But that takes a whole different lesson, or a whole different discussion, which you kind of have to see the steps and look at the related languages that inform us of this particular process. And remember that this is an open forum. And so if you want to join the panel, you can click the link at the top of the YouTube channel chat room, and you'll be able to join the discussion. All right. And let me stop sharing the screen. Brother Richard asks, in your studies of Ujamaa and quantum physics and ancestors, some who spoke of 12 dimensions, how is your research going? Well, when it comes to those 4 or 5 and up to 12 dimensions, and that's more so string. And although string theory has a lot of good mathematics, it has yet to prove itself in the scientific world. And so, some even consider string theory to be, pseudoscience at this point. But I won't necessarily go there. But I'm not sure if, these kind of dimensions that anybody would associate with native spiritual concepts in different worlds and the like would equate to the concept of dimensions as understood in string theory, right? And so that would be a good conversation to have just on its own in terms of what are these quantum dimensions, and what does that look like, and why what's the mathematics behind that? And people will see that it is a kind of a totally different concept than what a lot of folks are trying to equate. And I'm not sure that you could build worlds in the same way that you can experience like we do in this 3 or actually 4-dimensional space. In the same way you're talking about 12 dimensions, like that's a totally different concept. But when it comes to Ujamaa, now because of the vowels, are you talking about Nyame, like God, the deity in Nyame? Because I know Nyama, or is it Nyam? No, that's Noom. Is Noom. Like that, like there's a spirit force or power called Noom among like the Khoi people in Southwest Africa. But Nyame, well, I guess Nyama would be the spirit. Like if you read that book, The Ways of Our Elders or The Ways of Our Ancestors, something like that. They talk about that, but yeah, but that wouldn't equate to like dimensions. That would equate to like force and power, right? And so I'm not sure if I answered your questions adequately, but let me go on to the next. Brother Any Calfani is in the building. Peace and blessings. And Philontis, if a spirit isn't really a mystical thing that exists outside of a body, like the modern conceptual idea of a ghost, what are the ancient Egyptians referring to when they say that? And you're welcome, Sister Makia. And the spirit of Asar Aset in Heru are in the tree of life, or the acacia tree in ancient Kemet. What is that referring to as spirit? But first and foremost, when you're talking about Osiris and you're talking about Aset, you gotta understand these are myths. These are stories told about concepts, ideas, and hypotheses on the kinds of human relationships that develop when certain human beings have these type of characteristics, or they're talking about certain fundamental relationships of phenomena in existence itself, right? So when you got to understand that Asar and Aset. Well, let's go back to this concept of spirit. So the concept of spirit exists in two fundamental forms. You have the essential power or ability to make things happen in terms of a spirit, and then you have the concept of spirit in the form of an idea, right? Like, so when somebody talks about the spirit of a concept, right? You're talking about the essential characteristic that gives a phenomena its identity and in many respects its direction, right? And so you got to kind of understand that about myths. Now, I don't know about the whole tree of life. That may be some new age Muata Ashby trying to mix some stuff with Hindu type stuff. So, I would need to see primaries in regards to that. I know that, for example, with Osiris, after he was slain, he was put in a coffin or a type of tree, which is called Isser, and it's a tamarisk tree. So I'm not sure of the acacia tree. I'll have to read up on that, or you could provide me a source on that. So, and thank you, Sister Mika, for informing us where we can get the books mentioned. And Brother Sheffield says also South African Bantu scholars speak on the multidimensional nature of our being. There our ontological understanding is minimal in all we are. And that may be true. We still don't know how to deal with the concept of consciousness. Is consciousness something that, is emergent in nature, or something that is inherent, a fundamental product of existing itself? These are things that scientists grapple with and are, steadily trying to figure out. But again, when we're talking about dimensions, we got to be careful when we're using scientific terms and trying to apply them to so-called spiritual concepts, right? And so they have to be clearly defined for us to have a meaningful discussion and what they mean in a particular language, and of course in the scientific arena for which a lot of these concepts are that we're talking about here. And you're welcome, Vernon King. And let me see. Peace and blessings to Robin Rand, who's in the building. SE44, Arab, Zugichi. And I'm not sure if I saw anyone else who I haven't shouted out already. But thank you all for joining. And Sue Tech is in the building. And 42 Tribes is in the building. Peace and blessings. And he asks, how much Habesha ancestry do you think is Asian? A lot. Matter of fact, if you just search on YouTube, Ethiopians DNA test, you'll see all of them being surprised that they got lineages coming out of Arabia and Yemen, right? Because they think that their total ancestry is native born in Ethiopia, and that's not the case. But I don't know the percentages, and I won't even act like I do. Does the ready repetition of Kemetic cognates found in numerous African societies indicate that Meta Nature and perhaps ancient Egypt was a conglomerate of various African nations over time? No, it wouldn't indicate that. Although there is evidence of ancient Kemet being a multi-ethnic society, multilingual society, but that the meta nature or the language of ancient Egypt. Remember that the Sesh meta nature is actually the script, but I assume you're referring to the language. The language of ancient Egypt, the fact that you can find many cognate terms in related African languages really only points to the fact that that the ancestor culture and language of ancient Egypt is also shared by, modern Yoruba, for example, modern Hausa, modern Bantu, modern, Wolof, et cetera, et cetera. Those modern languages that share cognates with ancient Egypt, they all share the same dialectical ancestor language and culture. And those words that were able to confidently match between the languages were inherited from the pre-dialectical ancestor language and culture. So it wouldn't necessarily mean that, for example, because we find words among the Wolof, the Akan, the Yoruba, the Bantu, that they all existed in ancient Egypt and then left. That's not how that works. So it's that they share the same ancestral language that more than likely existed in and around the Great Lakes region, in Eastern Africa, and then they spread out over time and dispersed either through Sudan or, for example, in the Green Sahara when it was green, and the like. And so I hope that answers your question. And this is it. Sutek and Ngozi said, genetically, those are the same folks from ancient Egypt. I doubt it. And there's no indication that is the case. They don't even share the same language. So they don't even belong in the same language group or family. But we'll continue. In the Armana letters, Akhenaten refused to give his sister in marriage to the king of Babylon and say that Egyptian women were never married to foreigners. Is that true, and why? No, that is not true. I'm not saying that the issue in terms of Akhenaten may not be true. But a matter of fact, I think, his wife actually had some letters seeking husbands for their daughters from foreign lands. But Egyptians, let me break it down like this. You have the elite culture, and then you have the everyday on the ground, the people's culture, right? Now it's, and I hate to be crass, about this, but them folks did not care who they were sleeping. I mean, they cared who they were sleeping with, but in terms of because they belong to, groups that lived in the Middle East, they in the so-called different race, they did not care. They were marrying each other. They were having children with each other. That's why you have the kind of genetic diversity in Egypt today is because of the influx of foreigners and the marrying of each other, both patrilineal and matrilineal. They didn't have the kind of racist notions that the European descendant folks in the United States had. That they couldn't have sex with and marry. There was no laws and nothing like that. Most strong pharaohs would not, provide their daughters to other kings. That is, kind of common when they want to have like a peace, or they want to kind of unite two groups. You marry off one of your daughters. That wasn't common for pharaohs in Egypt, but the people on the ground did not give a rat's ass. If they saw a fine brother or sister, across the river, and they didn't care. They was macking back in the day. Let me see. Alex Ricky Tarot Numerology asks. It says, Christian names, not African names, related. How can bring this fundamental African ancestrality baggage to us here now in 23? How can we make our car as meaningful as many African names in the African continent? Thanks in advance. Again, I'm not sure if English is the primary first language, so it's kind of hard to understand the nature of your question. But I think I kind of get the gist of what you're asking. Let me read this again. Yeah, you're gonna have to you have to reword this. I don't quite understand exactly what you're asking. Because you're starting off with Christian names and not African names, but then you're asking how are we fundamentally related in terms of here in 2023? How can we make our names meaningful as many African names in the African continent? All righty, so I'm assuming. Okay, of course, somebody wants to call me at this moment. In terms of, matter of fact, and it's ironic that you asked me these questions, because I was planning on doing a short video, just kind of a pre-recorded video on the act of naming ourselves. So, traditionally in many African societies, especially when you go through certain rites of passages, you're the community, of course, your parents, your grandparents, a lot of times the father, it depends on whatever tradition that you exist in, of course, will give you your name. But of course, with us being in the diaspora, we have been given these Christian and even Muslim names if the family was Muslim, and they really don't connect to our ancestry. They really don't have, kind of a deep meaning, as would traditional African names. And so, it just really kind of depends on what's your flavor. You can name yourself. And that's something that, I want to discuss in as it relates to hip hop, because hip hop culture keeps that tradition where, we name ourselves, right? And in Dr. Chilimamlimam Mukinge's book, Muntu and Zombie, which I published through Madhuandela Press, he talks about that in the Congo, where among the Baluba people, of course, you're given a name by your parents and stuff on birth, but there's a certain time where you name yourself, right? And I find that in the spirit of hip hop culture, right? So we're going to have a discussion on that, but it's really just a matter of you kind of looking through African names and then seeing which one best reflects your being, right, or your perceived purpose in life, right? And so, and of course, with us trying to develop, our different cultures in the diaspora, we're just going to have to adopt a way, we're just going to have to start naming our children, African names. And that's how we kind of recapture that. Peace. Brother Garfield says, I heard he was part of the 12 tribes of Israel. I'm going back. I left ISUPK back in the day, but I'm coming back so I can answer these debates that y'all be having on Sonetta, right? At JM7 says, hi from the UK. Peace and blessings. Thank you for joining us here. And let me see. So Texas says the closest Jesus we got is turning water into syrup. Let me see. Peace to Ra X. He says, peace, good brother. Can the concept of Ntoro found in Ghana be found in Chikam or Chiluba or Kikongo? Yes, and I discussed all of that in the book Umoja, Volume 2. But I believe I have a presentation already on that, I believe. So let me try to find it real quick. And while I try to find it, I'm just going to play some music. So we're going to get back in our piano mode real quick. Hold on, I'll be right back.
Private jet keys in my yard, oh, nah.
Okay, I'm back. And so what I'm going to do is share my screen. And it looks like I'm going to have to share the full screen. Entire screen. There we go. So boom. So let me do. So the question is, can the concept of Ntoro found in Ghana be found in Chican, Chiluba, Kikongo? So, this is something that I deal with all the time. And so I am this was from, it wasn't necessarily a presentation in a traditional sense, but let me see. I had a guest, Dr. Alexis. What was his last name? This is he, Alexis Tingan, right? And y'all could check that interview out on the channel. He's out of Burkina Faso, not Burkina Faso, my bad. He's of the Dagara people, and he is of northern Ghana, ancestry of the Dagara. But many may know the Dagara people who live in Burkina Faso. So remember that the colonial lines split ethnic groups, right? So you have a large group of Dagara in northern Ghana, and you have Dagara in Burkina Faso. And so this is one of his books of Life and Health, the Language of Art and Religion in an African Medical System. And, here are some things. And if you're familiar with Dr. Malado Masome, who passed, relatively recently, within the past 2 years, I believe, he's kind of, well, at least for me, he was introduced me to the concept of the contemple. And in this book, Dr. Tangon talks about the contemple, and that word conton or inton is cognate with netter, and I was showing him this in our discussion. And so, and this is the word here, the conton, figures, knowledge of life, sustenance. I don't have time to go through all the details of that, but in the Dagara language, I demonstrate that their word tongue, meaning earth and land, is cognate with the Egyptian word ter. We say ta, like it's in Ta Mary, earth, land, and country. And their word for rain, sky, and heaven, Sa, is the god Shu, which represents the earthly sky, right? And so the goddess Nut represents more so outer space sky, right? And but these are the contemple, these are the contemple figurines in a shrine in Burkina Faso, West Africa. And so the contemple comes from this word conton, nature spirits, conton me, plural, contemple, child conton. And the word ble, meaning bile or small, bil, unborn, there. See, these are all variations of the child canton. And the word con, meaning to farm, and I don't agree with his breakdown of the word here, because we have other variations. So like this is why we have to go, like, for example, in the Akan language. And so you have in ton, The Abusuaban, meaning family, consanguinity, kindred. And then the Intoro, a person of the same ancient family, worshiping the same fetish, so to speak. So when you talk about the Intoro, this is it is really kind of the spirit. It's a patrilineal spirit. So they in the Akan language is narrowed down to, because it's really just spirit. It's just how should I say? I don't know if you were here for the earlier part of our conversation where I mentioned that a spirit is an agent that has the ability to create or make things happen, right? And so among the Akan, they have narrowed that spirit into the in terms of the patrilineal line. So in the dictionaries, you'll primarily see in Toro as the patrilineal spirit, or a person of that particular line, or sometimes the river, so to speak. And a variation of that word is what becomes intone, which is in that word konton ble, right? And because it's a farming spirit technically, but that's a conversation for another day. And so you will see these kind of variations, of the word. So you have, because it's kind of merged with the concept of water. So, like in ancient Egyptian, neter is a natron, kind of salt cleansing agent. But of course, neter, the god, the unseen fructifying agent. And Chui and Toro or Intro, the spirit of the patrilineage. In the Yoruba and Tori, because it's a causal. Remember, the spirit is a causal agent in things. And then among the Lugbara, it is Adro, guardian spirit. Adro, God. In among the Mbuti, in the forest is called Indura, which is God of the rainforest. And Indura is also forest. And Mbuti Efe Tore, supreme God. And really, this should be in the Luba language, in Dele. This is a partial, this is the root of the word without the prefix. In Delhi, in terms of a divine begetter or ancestor. And then in the Gurma and Gurmachi languages, Teru or Tinu, meaning God, right? It's just a spirit. And then you find it in Fulani and Tori, God. In the Maasai, Net Teru. But the ne is a feminine prefix on the word Teru. In Kwasio, in Ture, sacred. In Mombuti, Noro, God. Ewe, Tre, clan spirit, fetish. In Ijo, in Yoruba, in Nigeria, Toru, meaning river. Tonga, Tilu, dealing with it's kind of regulated now to the sky, but it has to deal with the fructifying agent of water. Because remember, the words for water and the word for spirit have kind of merged in a lot of these languages. So for some languages, it would just deal with water itself, and then variations on that concept, derivatives of that concept. So like in this case, and among the Ijo, it has to deal with the word for river. But among the Tonga, it's dealing with the word for sky, and it's also the word for God, because that's the location from which rain, water falls, right? And so you can see all of these different variations, in the language. And so I won't get too much into the Goltumble. Okay, so that's going into some different ages, but even that word in Toro again is in the word Konton, in the word Kontomble. And so these are the Kontomble of East Africa, right? So I'll stop sharing there. and try to keep up here. He says, I've seen recent Ethiopian tests where there are like 95, 99% Africans. But them old school tests with the weak databases made them almost half Eurasian. Yeah. Right. Man, where SSU there? Johnson's in ancient Egypt. That's a lie. So no invasions happened to get where the current population of Egypt is today. No, there were invasions. It's a mix. You got to understand with ancient Egypt, you're looking at four actually in terms of today. So let's assume that the pharaonic Egypt starts at 3200 BCE. The year right now is 2023. That's 5,000 years plus since the start of pharaonic Egypt. In pre-dynastic times, there were people from the Levant coming in and settling in Egypt. All throughout dynastic Egyptian history, there's people coming out of Europe and the Levant settling and living in Egypt. And then these are the normal people just either escaping famine, nomadic folks who are just looking even temporarily for places to stay, moving in and out of the Delta, finding grass and water for their cattle. And then that's on top of, so that's independent of the Libyan invasions, the, Arab, the Greek, the Roman invasions, the British invasions, the, any other groups that came out of those areas and who have invaded over the years. So it's not a situation that is as simple as, there's this one big massive invasion, like in the case of the United States with Europeans that came and settled. There's been an influx in and out. So not only people coming into Egypt, but people coming out of Egypt into the Middle East and the Levant. So this is how you get the large mixed population. I don't think y'all can understand how long 5,000 years is. Think about it today. Look at the average looking African American. We've only been in this country for 400 years, right? And I'm not with those pseudos talking about we the natives, the native blacks that would BS. So we're going to stay in reality on this show. So, we've only been in this country for 400 years. And we have had the quote unquote benefit of having laws enacted to keep Africans from mixing with Europeans in this country. So we were put in ghetto conditions where, we were mixing highly only amongst ourselves. But of course, there's still in later parts there's intermarriage going on, but in the early parts there's a lot of rapes. So even with that bottleneck, the way that African Americans look today in comparison, like if you can find photos of a slave ship, look at how those Africans looked, and then look at your average African American today. We still have a strong African, phenotype and the like because of segregation, because of redlining and laws trying to keep us away. But I forgot. I think it's National Geographic that. Matter of fact, I'm just going to find it. National Geographic. United States. Let's see. Dang, I need to find how they worded that. All right. I know y'all know what I'm talking about. It's a National Geographic. Is it the visualizing? Here we go. So I'm gonna share my screen. Right. Present, share screen. Boom. So it is. I don't want to unlock the story for free, but this is apparently how Americans on average will kind of look in the near future as they kind of project it, right? Because of all the intermixing here in the United States. Now, these, by social definitions, for example, these people will be called Black, right? In terms of the racial hierarchy and class system here in the United States, right? But the, imagine this in 5,000 years. Like, that's what people aren't getting. When you're looking at people today in modern Egypt, this is 5,000 years later. With invasions and non-invasions, just people settling of various phenotypes in the area. And we got to keep this in mind. As a matter of fact, let's see. See if I can find. Yeah, this is the changing faces of America. All right. Oh, that's right. It's not going to show until I share. Let me do this. I know that image is too small. I don't know if y'all can kind of see this, right? So I'm going to stop sharing and then reshare. The Pinterest link. Here we go. So you kind of see this is from the same article. So you got to kind of sign in and pay to see the full article. But you kind of can see how they kind of project the American's face to look in the near future. And so when especially when it comes to Black folks, most Black folks probably kind of look like these two brothers here, right? More so than the sister here, because of our small numbers here in the United States. We can easily get, caught up like that. And so we got to kind of understand it. So this is, remember, we've only been here, just around 400 years. From 1619 to 2019 is 400 years, right? So compound that into 5,000 years, right? It is not going to be the same. So it's not that many of those folks aren't the descendants of ancient Egyptians. It's just, the ancient Egyptians didn't look like the people who you see there now. But it seems we have someone joined us in the from the chat. Juan Lindsay, if I'm saying that correctly. Welcome to
Yes, sir.
the program. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Peace, brother Asar. How you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. And yourself?
Man, I'm good. I just wanted to chime in really quick, man, for a quick second. I'm actually working right now, so I have a few questions for you, and then yeah, I'll hop off and continue to listen to the show.
No problem.
So I know you're highly affiliated with ASCAC, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I got a chance to tune in to a few of the days of the ASCAC festival. I mean, not festival, I said festival, but the the ASCAC conference last week. Great presentations. Uh, I am interested to hear your thoughts on well, two different things. The first thing is Dr. Mari. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but Mario Beatty.
Yeah, I think I say Beatty, but I could be pronouncing it wrong. He's never corrected me
Right.
on it. So Beatty, you know,
Oh,
I think he accepts both.
right. So he did a presentation on and excuse me if I'm screwing up his title of his presentation, but he did a reinterpretation of the Ankh symbol, right? And
Mm-hmm.
saying that it's not a sandal or like a sandal strap or something like that. And I just
Yeah.
wanted to know what you thought about his presentation if you were able to check it out. And second thing, I wanted to know your take on the guy Zahi Hawass now doing now doing a U.S. tour to try to quell the idea of, I guess, black Egyptians or African Egyptians. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
he's now doing that tour to try to kind of squash the whole idea of that narrative. But yeah, that's all. Those are the two things that I just wanted to ask you, brother. And yeah, I'll jump off and I'll listen in.
All righty. I do appreciate you coming on, and thank you for your questions.
Yes, sir.
And I know it's going to be a slight delay by the time you get off, but so hopefully, if you're jumping off immediately, you'll still be able to hear it.
Oh well, I'll
But
stay on while you answer. That's
all
no
right, there's
problem.
no problem. Well, to the first question, I was unable to view and attend the ASCAT conference this year, so I was not able to see his presentation. So I don't know what's the direction he went, and so I would ask you as a follow up, in summary, what did he argue is the Ankh symbol?
He argued that it was, and I may be screwing this all up, but just he argued that it wasn't necessarily what some people view as a sandal or sandal strap. He
Mm-hmm.
argued that one of his colleagues, I believe one of his colleagues in California, and I don't have my notes in front of me, so forgive
Mm-hmm.
me, but he argued that one of his colleagues in California, that he agreed with that colleague in saying that the Ankh is actually symbolic of some type of dang, what's the plant? Maybe the lotus, maybe I may be wrong, I could be wrong, but it was some type of plant that the Ankh represents. Um, dang man, what was that? What was that plant? Yeah, it's evading me right now, but I do know he was arguing that the ankh is symbolic of that type of plant. Um, yeah, I
Mhm.
can't think of the name of the plant, man. I think I'm not sure if it's a lotus flower or something like that, but yeah.
Yeah, the unk is kind of hard. I would have to review that person's argument,
Hmm.
but my just based on my research and analysis, my first hunch is to disagree, and because the unk itself is a stylization of several different things, because one has to deal with the tying of a rope or tying of a belt. And what many people forget, that like when you look at the old kingdom unks, they're ropes, and these are the kinds that you would use to kind of like to tie around your body. So you're looking at the loop as what was on the waist, and then the the kind of the tying with the knot, and it freely falling, the rest of the excess freely falling in the front of the body. But then you also have the unk that derives from, it's either a human body or from cattle, but it's actual bone. It's your vertebrae, and the what became the loop is the top rib, the shoulder, not the top rib, the shoulder. Well, yeah, it's the top rib. The circular part is the top rib, and what people would consider like kind of the arms. This would be like your collarbone, right? And when you just look at your the anatomy of your body, and I wrote about this way back in 2009, and I did an updated one in 2011, and some years later, I actually found another. Now I argue that it's from a human body, but I found another article on the where they're talking. They essentially agreed with me, but they're arguing that it's a bull's spine and collarbone and collar and the like. And then we can find in related languages, these terms actually being cognate with the word unk itself. So, like, for it to be a plant, I'd have to see that argument. That I don't think there's any evidence stronger than the actual body, the vertebrae. Um, Let me see if I can find, so I can kind of show people, because I know I have a presentation somewhere. I would hope so. Um,
Really quick, while you do
yeah,
that, along the lines of that, there is no credence to the this might sound crazy, but I've seen, and this is not what I follow or anything, but I'm just
hmm,
asking, there's no credence to the idea that the ankh is somehow synonymous or related to the pineal gland, is it?
no.
Oh, okay, okay.
I shouldn't say no. I my academic response is, in my assessment of these arguments, I have not found the evidence to be compelling to accept that hypothesis.
Right, right, okay. Gotcha.
So, I just don't want to outright just say uh, no, but the hood in me saying no. Uh, no no penile glands. Um, Dang it, I know I have it on this thing. Um, Let me see. I know I don't know where my presentation is, but I know I can show uh, what I produced in written form, so y'all can kind of see what I'm talking about here. Um, no. Darn it, where's that image? I created an image specifically. Well, while I'm looking for this, in regards to your second question regarding Zahi Hawass, um, I I know for a fact that he is very anti-Black African, and he separates ancient Egypt and Egypt, modern day Egypt, from Africa. He, for some reason, he does not believe Egypt is in Africa. But
Yep.
that's a different issue than uh, what people are proposing. Now, when I first heard about this tour, I know somebody had hit me up and called me and was like, we need to make a response to this. And I'm like, well, first and foremost, every time Zahi Hawass comes to the United States, it's a lot of us following him around protesting, and it makes no difference. But
Right.
secondly, I want to make sure that that is exactly the case. I don't want to show up somewhere and that's not even what he's about. So when I looked at the website of Black people being anti-Black, the claim is that he's coming around to discuss, new archaeological finds and all this other kind of stuff. So there's nothing on the surface of the tour that has anything to do with trying to separate Egypt from Black people, and it's an anti-Black anything. So I stayed away because it's like that's not even what is the focus. So I think people just know about his personal stance when it comes to ancient Egypt and Black Africa, and they are imposing that on this particular tour that has a totally different focus than what people are purporting that he's going around. Like, that's not, like, go read what the site. It has nothing to do with what everybody's claiming.
Right. Okay, gotcha.
So I know once you get off this phone, this show ends, I'm gonna find exactly what it is I'm looking for, and probably some lost socks that I forgot I was looking for at some time. But I just have to find it. But anyway, so yeah, I hope that answers your question. But for me, it is primarily two things. It's a rope in the Old Kingdom, in the earliest renditions of the Ankh, which also would correlate to the word Ankh, meaning to tie, and the word Ankhet, meaning rope. But the later rendition is more so stylized after the body in terms of the Ankh itself, which is why you would see, for example, the Djed pillar, like the Ankh, superimposed with the Djed pillar, because it represents the spine. It's a body type. It's not a plant.
Gotcha. That makes sense. That makes sense. Well, yeah, man, I appreciate it. I love your work. Keep going, man. You inspire me, to do further study, deeper study, proper study. So yeah, man, I just appreciate it, man. And yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and hop off, but I'll be listening in.
Oh, no doubt. And again, thank you for
yes, sir. Peace.
For joining us and for your questions. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. All right.
All right. And we have with us as well, if I'm saying this correctly, Kuhani Mwadeli. You'll just have to pronounce it for me.
Yeah, it's Kuhani Wadeli. I changed my name. I'm this brother Lionel, by the way. I just changed my name.
No doubt. Appreciate you coming on.
All right, good. Right on. Okay, so I have a question for you because I've been doing my own research on North Africa, specifically the the Berbers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I've read several, books on that particular population, right? And let me just go through, where I'm about to say. So,
Mm-hmm.
with all my research, I'm going to mention the books real quick. With all my research, um, on reading North Africa, I've honestly came to the conclusion that, North Africa was a mixed population from the very beginning, and those people that are there now are, descendants of people who back migrated, invaded. They're just very mixed up. And let me just go through, the book I've been reading, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, okay, the first book that I had read that gave me an idea that the North Africans are, the same people are, it's a book called Saint Augustine, an intellectual biography by Miles Hollingsworth. And in the first chapter of the book, they talk about how, Saint Augustine was probably one of the greatest rhetoricians of his era. And they talked about his early life when he went to school, and the Romans, to make fun of him,
Mm-hmm.
they always called him Punic. And we know the Punics are descendants of the Carthaginians, and we know that Carthage is basically a civilization that was founded by the Phoenician people. And then, that was the first thing that let me know that they're, most likely the same people. The second book um, that I had read was a book on the Berbers. It's called The People of the Veil by R. Ronell Rod. And
Mm-hmm.
R. Ronell Rod had lived amongst the Tuareg in the 1800s. And, he talked about how in their origins, they claim that they came from a woman. I think her name was Ten Hunan, something like that. It just meant, tent mother. And that they actually came from like the northern Sahel, and they migrated, further downward. And it's very, it's very, it's giving me, conclusions that they're, the same group of people there. And I add one more thing too.
Mm-hmm.
Even I read a book called Jews of the Saharan Oasis by John O'Hunwick, where he talks about how, when the Romans destroyed the last temple, a lot of them went into, North Africa, and they traded and they stayed up there. And even one last thing too, there's another book I had read called African Glory by J.C. DeGraff Johnson. And there was a famous Berber queen by the name of, Kahina, who was, a Jewish priestess and everything like that, fighting against, the Arab invasion. So, like, could it just be possible when we put all of those things together that, they're just a very mixed and diverse population? Because, I mean, I'm just,
I would I would agree to the point that the Northeast African history is complex, but not that it's always been that way. And we know, for example, like people forget like the Libyan mummy that was found of a really dark black African child that predates ancient Egypt, right?
right,
And this is the practice that becomes the famous practice that you see, of course, in later years in ancient Egypt. Meaning these and you still find these roaming black African people still there. Like these dark black African people have always been in North Africa and been in the Sahara and the Sahel and things of this nature. They've always been there. And I've even read texts where it's argued, for example, that the Berber language really and its people originated out of the Sudan.
The Tamashek language, because that's the language
Yes,
that they speak.
exactly. Like remember, let's assume for the sake of conversation that Afroasiatic is a thing, which it isn't. And I heard someone coming in, and I'm gonna get you in just a sec. I can't see because I'm on full screen right now, but it would make sense in terms of these darker people because you have a flux of individuals coming in and landing in pre dynastic times, coming in out of the Levant and things because everyone is trying to escape the famine. So remember, you had the Green Sahara going on for a while. Then around 5,000, 300 BCE, it starts the drying of the area now. So it's going to take some time, but it's encouraging groups to push outwards, right? But the same issues in terms of the melting of the quote unquote, or I should say the ending of the ice age in Europe and the melting of the polar ice caps is what's drawing all of the moisture from North Africa, but also in the Middle East. So you have these peoples trying to forage and find and migrate, trying to look for viable spaces of water, not only for themselves, but especially if they're nomadic pastoralists looking for cattle. And so you find a lot of them traveling and ending up in North Africa. And the ancient Egyptians knew that the ancient Egyptians looked at these people as foreigners. And they depicted themselves differently from these folks. And so, and just as I said earlier in the conversation, I'm not sure if you was here to listen to the question that someone else asked regarding the current population. And I mentioned that the current population is an admixed group from, native Black African folks, and then folks who came from the Middle East since pre-dynastic times. I remember in 2015 when I went to Egypt and we was in Nubia, right? We was in Aswan, it was going further down. and I have it on video. Like we be on the Nile River and on the boat traveling. And so in Nubia, of course, you see nothing but Black African folks, like in a traditional stereotypical sense, right? Look like your uncles and your aunties, and coming out of Georgia, and Louisiana, right?
Right.
And then just dead smack in the middle of them, you'll see some Syrians, like a whole family of Syrians. And you're wondering, like, what the hell is going on? And so you just see it just like on the edge of the Nile River, it's just Black folks, Black folks, Black folks. And then a whole family of Syrians. Because at this time, I think in 2015, there was a war in Syria. And so, it caused a lot of the citizens to move. Now, a lot of them ended up in Egypt, and a lot of them ended up in what we would call Nubia. So some years from now, right? Some of the people from the younger generation, they out there playing with each other, and they get grown and start liking each other, then start having children. Now you're getting these genetic contributions in Nubia from Syria. And so I'm witnessing this in 2015. And so this is, according to the biblical story, what were they escaping? Famine. Israelites came and settled in, then 400 years later, they leave as a mixed, quote unquote, multitude. You know, Egypt is the place where a lot of folks settled. So, you know, this notion, that's why it's like it's kind of a dumb argument to be going back and forth in terms of strictly believing that everyone in the society was a very dark complexion. Now, what I argue is that the founding people were the people that you would see just like living when you go into Aswan today. Like those folks, there is that group of people that gave Egypt its language, that gave Egypt its fundamental culture, which everybody who came and settled adopted.
I have another question concerning, the culture of North Africa, right?
Hold on. Before you
Okay.
go there, I just want to answer our previous brother's question, because of course, as I predicted, as soon as he leave, I was going to find it. So this is something I did when I was dealing with the Ankh symbol. And, you know, you'll find, like, so when you say the word Ankh can mean life, live, be alive, living, person, inhabitant, citizen, living one, person, citizen, living one, etc. You can be life or a human being itself. So you'll find these memes, you know, on the internet of the Ankh being a womb, like the combination of a womb and a phallus, right? And it's just nonsense. And then, you know, you get Brother Reggie's so-called secret of the Ankh. You know, he's thinking that the word Ankh is an acronym, and that it coincides with Amen, Amenet, Nun, Nunet, Ket, 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 Het, 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 just craziness. Because for one, it's a triliteral, and each three of these are consonants. And so this is like a D or a Z sound. This right here, and then and then H. And so this is like this is not two separate sounds that he's trying to make it here. So I don't know what Brother Reggie was thinking with that. Then you have some talking about the Ankh is E equals MC squared. Right, just all kinds of crazy hypotheses. This brother here, Legacy Allen, you know, swears not even really not outside of this little part right here. There's not even a similar design. I don't know where he got that from, but this is, you know, my proposal here. The latest one being in 2013. The Ankh is the thoracic complex of the human body. So when I was talking about, you know, the like this is your sternum right here, and then these are your you know, your collarbone, and this is the circle of the last rib. And so when you look at, you know, whether it's cattle or the human body, you will see the Ankh here. That's why it's associated with the word for body, right? And you can see the vertebrae right here in terms of your neck, and that's what you see when they superimpose the Ankh on the Djed pillar, which is supposed to be the spine, more specifically the spine of Osiris, right? And so some other things that I dealt with here. And so this is what I was talking about earlier, like the word or like the earliest renditions of the Ankh in the Old Kingdom is a rope. It's a tied piece of rope here. And so this is a graphical representation. And it's no different than the word for Shin and Shinu. Like these are ropes that are tied together. Like just different variations in form. And I can show you how these are all variations of the same word, just backwards. So when you say, you know, the so-called in the word Ankh is a prefix on the in root. And then the syllabic inverse is Shin and Shinu, right? And then you can see the Inqua, which is the Ankh and one of the Akan, it's the same thing. You see the vertebrae, you know, on the back of this. It's a human, it's a person. You're talking about their kind of physical structure. So I would love to see the presentation where, you know, he's claiming that it's a plant. So I'm not going to dismiss it out hand. But for me, the evidence is stronger, you know, that is the thoracic complex. But anyway, I'll stop that. Add Zugichi to the conversation. And before we bring him in, go ahead with your second question or statement.
My second question is, okay, like, would it be possible that since, like, all throughout Egypt's, like, inception, right, civilization, etc., that since, you know, Egypt has had a massive influx from people who come from the Levant region, you know, the Phoenicians finding Carthage, even the Berbers, the ones who haven't, you know, converted to Islam, you know, them being matriarchal, which historically speaking, you know, matriarchal societies are primarily a Middle Eastern thing, and influx of people coming in from the Levant area. Could it be possible that ancient Egyptian culture is basically a Middle Eastern culture because you've had,
Nope.
a Middle Eastern population that came there back and forth thousands of years?
Nope. And I'm going to tell you why. Because even then and even today, it is so different. The attitudes, the concepts that you would make of ancient Egypt, even the terms that they refer to certain things. So like if the ancient Egyptians derived from folks in the Middle East, you would see first and foremost their language, right? It would be a Semitic language. The ancient Egyptian would be a Semitic language, which it is not. Their form of kingship, their terms for family would be the same, and they're not. Their words for animals aren't even the same. And this is something that has been known for a very long time. This is something that was even pointed out even in the days of Diop. Like if they're coming and settling down and bringing their culture, and I'm not saying that they're not bringing nothing, is that what they brought was not very impactful, and or they abandoned it for the Egyptian culture. And this is something that I discuss in Umoja Volume 2 as well. So matter of fact, I'm just going to go to it. So let me do this. Nope, not commit submission. There we go. Book. And Umoja Volume 2. Here we go. So I'm going to share my screen, but I'm going to go to the last chapter, right? Because, people act brand new, like we ain't been dealing with this stuff seriously for a very long time. Like we ain't got that homework. Nonetheless, so in how many chapters? Here's the bar. Submit it. Let's see. What's this? How many chapters I have in this one? Because I'm dealing with, so that's in 495. Okay, so I'm going to 495. All right. So some of the things that I mentioned. So I'm dealing with the Semitic languages and how Semitic was formed. But so let me skip past the linguistic stuff. And it's a particular citation. Deal with Sumerian. Nope, don't want to deal with that. I heard someone else come in, and I'm gonna get to you in just a second. So let me do. Here we should be in the right. Nope. Dang, where is? Yes, I'm getting the genetic stuff. I just want to get to the point of showing speaker inscriptions. Nope. Darn it. And watch, I'm gonna find it as soon as we get off, because it's a specific citation. I'm still dealing with Sumerian here and Semitic. Let me do a quick search for the font. So I'm dealing with so I'm dealing with how even Semitic is a result of multiple origins. And so we're talking about Africans coming into the Levant and helping to form Semitic. But that's not. So here we go. I think this is the area. So this is chapter 13, page starting on 534. where, and can you see it clearly? Or do I have to make it bigger?
I can see it.
Let me just do it like that. It's going to have to be where it is. So I'd say another layer to this complex scenario is the trade relations between Kemet and the Levant as early as the 5th and 4th millennium BCE. Thus, there continued to be influence on Semitic languages and culture due to trade between Kemet and the Levant during and after the early formation of Pharaonic Kemet. We know this from the archaeological record as told to us, for example, by Elliot Braun in his article, South Levantine Encounters with Ancient Egypt at the Beginning of the 3rd Millennium. It says archaeological data presently available suggests that within the chronological parameters of the developed, therefore the late early Bronze I and early Bronze II age, and somewhat circumscribed locality of core area roughly encompassing the north of the Negev and the southern Shephelah, which is a Piedmont between a coastal plain and a central mountainous region of Israel and corresponding latitudes, indigenous South Levantines encountered Egyptian influence on a scale that ranges from massive to virtually nil. So I'm setting up here showing that the influence, the power and influence was on the side of Egypt and not in the Levant. And so he goes on further to say, and later the early Bronze I phase is associated with a great deal of Egyptian and Egyptianized material that probably dates to around the time of Narmer, whose name is found on a sarek from this site. The symbol is complete, but all that was recovered was from a single sherd, blah, blah, blah. We want to set the context for a better understanding of the nature and the degree of influence on the side of the Levant from Kemet from this early time, as told to us by Catherine A. Bard in her essay, The Emergence of the Egyptian State. Let me see. So between Khantar and Rafia, about 250 early settlements have been located by the North Sinai expedition of Ben Gurion University, with 80% of the ceramics of Egyptian wares dating to Naqada 2 to 3 and Dynasty 0. Israeli archaeologists suggest that this evidence represents a commercial network established and controlled by the Egyptians as early as the early Bronze Age 1A, and that this network was a major factor in the rise of the urban settlements found later in Palestine in EBA 2. Naomi Parak's technology study of ceramics from EBA sites in the southern Palestine clearly demonstrates that in EBA 1B strata, many of the pottery vessels used for food preparation were probably manufactured by Egyptian potters using Egyptian technology, but local Palestinian clays. In EBA 1B strata, there are also many storage jars made from Nile silk and marl whales, which must have been imported from Egypt. Not only did the Egyptians establish camps and way stations in the southern Sinai, but the ceramics evidence also suggests that they established a highly organized network of settlements in southern Palestine where an Egyptian population was resident. So everybody want to talk about, for example, people coming from the Middle East into Egypt, but forgetting that it was the Egyptians who came and set up colonies all throughout the Levant and in the Middle East. And in this text, I won't read all of it. Which one of them I'm looking for? So this is from the text, Lower Egyptian Communities and Their Interactions with Southern Levant in the 4th millennium BC, 2013. Thus far, it has been generally accepted that the Chalcolithic period, or the Chalcolithic period, and in the beginning of the early Bronze I, the Sinai Peninsula remained under Southern Levantine influences. However, the research by an expedition from Ben Gurion University, which we talked about up there, in northern Sinai shows that depending on the period, the status of Sinai vis-a-vis different neighboring territories vary considerably, as suggested by numerous new sites found. pastoral campsites dating from the Chalcolithic to the early Bronze IV period, both on the Chalcolithic and the early Bronze I sites. Canaanite pottery was accompanied by pre-dynastic Egyptian pottery, while on the Chalcolithic sites, the amount of Egyptian pottery was insignificant. On the early Bronze I sites, it sometimes represents as much as 80% of the entire material recovered. In EB1, the character of settlements in the North Sinai changed as a result of intensified contacts between Egypt and the southern Levant. In that period, the economy of the local population largely depended on the activity of trade route connecting with both regions. Egyptian Canaanite trade exchange constituted the reason of being for the early Bronze Age communities in the Sinai, with agriculture being an occupation. And then it goes on, because I'm trying to find this one where it talks about the Levant folks who came into Egypt and abandoned their culture over time. Let me see. No, that's Semitic. So let me see. The Around Canaan says in the delta in the middle of the Fork of the Sea could have been caused by a cultural. This is just an important citation, regardless. The arrival of the Canaanite settlers to the Nile Delta in the middle of the 4th millennium BC. So we're seeing that people are coming in from the quote unquote Middle East in the 4th millennium. That's in the 3000s BCE, right? Had been caused, in the 4th millennium. Let me start over. The arrival of the Canaanite settlers to the Nile Delta in the middle of the 4th millennium BC could have been caused by the cultural and political situation in the contemporary Canaan. Possibly the migration was linked to economic recession. The first Levantine findings in the Delta are dated to the end of the Chalcolithic, when southern Levantine cultural systems became unstable. The period in the question saw a profound change in the settlement and economic systems. The underlying reasons are believed to include natural disasters, droughts, epidemics, earthquakes, and cultural factors, waves of migrants, economic changes. Some Chalcolithic settlements were deserted and their inhabitants moved to higher regions. Human migrations were further intensified and certain groups could have reached as far as the Delta. Migration routes went through the northern Sinai, culturally linked to the southern Levant in time. And let me see. I'm going to deal with the Semitic stuff here. Oh, I have to. So I'm missing a citation. And what did I skip? Okay, so yeah, right above it. So in that same text, it says, and originally they cultivated their own separate identity and traditions, talking about the people coming out of the Middle East, more specifically the Levant. But over time, the strangers assimilated with the locals and adopted Lower Egyptian cultural traditions. The assimilation process was so powerful that materials dated to phase 2 of the early Bronze Age show no traces indicating the presence of foreign settlers in Buto. So you got to look at all of these discussions in context. So when these folks were coming into ancient Egypt, they were assimilating and adopting Egyptian culture. So they weren't coming in with an abundance of power and influence that they shaped significantly ancient Egyptian culture. This is why these conversations and these details, when we're doing linguistic and cultural analysis with Central, Western, and Eastern Africa, are very important, because this is the hub for where the culture exists. So these same ideas, these same practices, these same terms used for political positions, for family, for religion and deities and the like, are still present in Africa even to this day. which doesn't exist over there in the Middle East. So when people try to throw that, these folks, came in and brought all the culture, it's a bunch of BS. And they can't demonstrate that with any archaeological, any linguistic. I didn't even get into the linguistic citations, which shows that these folks, matter of fact, there's a whole bunch of Semites who were running around here with Egyptian names because the Egyptians had colonies in the Middle East. Their influence was the most dominant.
Thank you for answering the question.
No doubt, no doubt.
And what book is that from? So I can buy it.
It is, that one in particular was Lower Egyptian Communities. I'll put it in the chat. So it's Lower Egyptian Communities and their interactions with Southern Levant in the 4th millennium BC. And if you have my book, you'll get the other citations which reinforce that as well that I cite in this chapter. So the focus of this chapter is to show how the ancient Egyptian culture and language influenced the development of Semitic and even certain aspects of the Semitic culture that was adopted, there. So you'll just have to, see the full text. But that particular text that I just cited is where that last citation came from. And with that said, we're going to go to Brother Zugichi.
Peace, Asar.
Peace.
This is Aziz Zuchedo, by the way.
Indeed. What's good, brother?
Man, pleasure, man. Nice seeing you back online and dropping some more gems.
Indeed.
It's interesting. Kulani Mwadilufu brought up the Berbers. I'm curious. Have you ever been interested in doing comparisons with the Garamanti script?
The script or the language?
The script. I'm not sure if what they know about like the language really. But I just saw not too long ago that they do have like a few stelae and a few things like that, and they're described as being Berber. Although I guess they do know that they do have some ancient Egyptian ancestry. They say that they get some of their like the Fagara techniques from ancient Egypt and some grain stuff like that. They also say that like they worship Amen and other deities and stuff like that. But when people say Berber, sometimes I don't know. It's sometimes I'm not totally convinced, and a lot of things are assigned to these populations sometimes, and it makes you wonder how people are really making those judgments. Not that I'm better positioned than them to make the judgment, but we all get to look at the data that they publish, I guess. But yeah, what do you think about the Garamantes and their possible connection with other African groups?
Man, that's a question for
the slave stuff.
That's a question for Dr. Keita. He's the one who would be dealing with that. And I have some material and even some stuff that he's written that hasn't even been published yet.
No doubt.
But like that's a project of Berbers that I intend to do a deep and serious study on. I just haven't had time because of my focus on Central Africa. And I want to move there because, again, when I came across this source about the possible origin of Berber language in Sudan, you know, it sparked something because it's. And matter of fact, I have this book, and I haven't found it that credible, but I need to review it again. And it's dealing with. Let me see if I can find it. Dealing with the Berbers, and you know, because they're trying to argue that the ancient Egyptians came from the Berbers, so that's what I'm like.
Right.
Because again, see, what's always going to betray these folks is the language.
Yes.
Because you know,
I think so. And the chronological context.
Yeah, it's like the language is always going to tell us where these folks came from, because you know people just don't show up and invent a new language out of nowhere that's unrelated to, you know, its ancestral language. And or for example, they conquer an area and then they adopt the native people's language and don't impose their own.
Right.
Because it would be if it was Berbers who were the creators of the Egyptian language and culture, then the Egyptian language would be a Berber language. It's just as simple as that.
And it really doesn't. You really don't see that. You might even see the other way around. You know, at least some things. You know,
that's like the you know, the British coming over here and invading what is now called the United States from the Native Americans, but we all speak Chinese. We don't even speak the English language, right? Or any of the Native American languages. We just got a random language that ain't related to our language in Great Britain. Like, it makes no sense. But I heard someone else
go ahead.
trying to jump in. I see we have Raw X here as well, and I'm gonna get back to you, Zugichi. I just want to make sure that I acknowledge and bring them into the discussion as well. So peace and blessings, Raw X.
Peace. Can you hear me, brother?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
Right on. I sent you a CashApp, brother. I don't know if you saw that.
I haven't seen it just yet, but I do appreciate it.
And likewise, I appreciate you, man. But I don't know. I've been lately. I've been thinking about, you know, why is the Abrahamic faith anti-Ifa, anti-Egypt, and a part of me thinks that, you know, with Akhenaten and the story of Akhenaten and him being rejected after his death, I got this theory that, you know, the priesthood was also rejected or thrown, you know, cast away. And so that priesthood intermingled with, you know, the people's. I remember watching your lecture on Yahweh, you know, and they worship like Set, and these other deities, these desert or sky deities. And so I'm just wondering if I can bring it all together. You know, is there any evidence of, you know, that priesthood, you know, intermingling with those people?
Alrighty. And before I go there, we have Brother Kuhani back. I want to say welcome back. Was there any question that you wanted to ask or statement you wanted to say?
It's just, you know, it's just thank you for, you know, clarifying the you know, my questions and stuff like that. And I was looking at the comments Oh, I was looking at the comments, right?
Uh-huh.
And somebody has said the heritage or something ain't Toreg or something like that. But yeah, I mean it's I just thought at first, since the people from the Middle East came through Egypt all those times, that they would have a really, the culture would change from within. You know,
Yeah, I don't. I'm and listen to me. I'm not naive enough to say that there was not any influence, but all the vast majority of the literature that you read that's honest is going to say that the Egyptians had the prestige. They had the power and prestige for a very long time. And what you find more is that when foreigners, like even think about it, even at the time of the Greeks, when the Greeks came in, did they just superimpose Greek culture? No, they adopted Egyptian culture. So they're consulting Egyptian priests. They're depicting themselves in the Egyptian style. They're wearing Egyptian crowns. It's not the togas and Zeus and all of this other kind of stuff. And they're ruling Egypt. Egypt was that prestigious. To even to this day, we're still talking about them, right? And if it wasn't for colonialism, we wouldn't be talking about no dang Hebrews. So, Egypt is the one that has the prestige and the power. And the even the contributions in terms of loan words is minimal coming out of Semitic languages into ancient Egyptian. But I want to go back to, because I think hopefully he remembers what he was about to say. So we're going to go back to Zood, and we're going to hit Rax's question. So,
I kind of forget what I was saying, but it just I think it just goes back down the same line of sometimes it takes African voices a little bit of, it still takes African voices a little bit of a longer time to be heard in some academic circles.
indeed.
But I think a lot of evidence is there, but it needs to be put in context, and perhaps more scholars need to dialogue on certain issues, stuff like that. But y'all can go ahead. I don't want to hold it up.
All right, no doubt. And so I'm sorry. Please repeat your question again, Rax.
Yeah. So let's see if I can clean it up. So I'm just curious, and maybe I don't know if this is
Oh, the
for me.
priesthood and
Yeah, just priesthood, because I suspect that the anti-Egypt, anti-Ifa, I think I heard you say that before. Presence in modern day Abrahamic faith, I think is a remnant of, it's just my theory, our idea that the priesthood of Akhenaten would have been rejected by the society after his death, and so they were probably cast, out of upper echelon of Egypt, and so I imagine them having a resentment, and then maybe exiting Egypt and intermingling with others, and kind of bringing that concept and intermingling with others. And I've recently read Moses and Monotheism, and it kind of touches on that type of stuff. So I was just curious if there's anything that you could enlighten me on.
well, I can't say in the realms of anything definitive that it was something between like priesthoods, right? I think, and this is just my personal opinion in terms of the historical Israelites. Biblical Israelites and historical Israelites can be two different things. Why? Because mofos just love to lie and big up there and make up stories of grandeur and the like. Ancient Egyptians too, So, but the historical Israelites, in my personal opinion, were really Arabs. that migrated into Canaan and adopted the Canaanite language, and over time its dialect is what became Hebrew. And these folks just had an inherent disdain for not only the ancient Egyptians, but for any of the big political powers. Because these big political powers, you got to understand the shift that is going on socially and economically in this time period. So we're coming from a time where the vast majority of human beings were either hunter-gatherers or nomadic pastoralists or small horticulture farming communities. And so now, as a result of farming, you're able to establish larger territory, more people can be sustained in a given area. And now we're taking over all of the prime land. There are still communities that are nomadic pastoralists who roam, who was able to freely roam. And now you have these groups who have set up shop and have all of these regulations, and now all of these conflicts are coming about because of the shifting demographic and the shifting power relations between nomadic folks, nomadic pastoralists, and people who are now urbanites and part of kingdoms and the like. And so now they're seeing that they really can't compete as nomadic pastoralists amongst these groups. So they're going to have to adapt and become a solidified people. And in their eyes, the only way that we can be us is to be anti them, whoever them is. And so any and everything that was associated with these particular groups, they found it in themselves to create, or at least a certain priest, when they're trying to develop this culture and trying to solidify these people, saying in order for us to be a people, we can't be doing the exact same things that they're doing or do it the way that they do. Now, they can't, as I discussed in the Umoja Volume 2, they're practicing Ifa in the text, in the Bible. Right? Even Ifa, dialectical variation of the word, is in the text. And they consult these people, and but it's limited to necromancy for the most part in these particular texts. But I go through all of the language and linguistics in the scriptures which show these things. You'll find everywhere they can try to argue against being like the Egyptians or being like these other people, but they're doing many of the exact same things. It's just putting some other regulations on it. Right? And so I don't know if there's any evidence specifically of a conflict between priesthoods, but I'm thinking this is much larger and has to deal with the socioeconomic and power relationships between people, more so than a very narrow group of individuals, in terms of priesthoods. This is why, for example, you have the same story told twice, once in ancient Egypt and once in the Bible. So in ancient Egypt, the idea of nomadic pastoralism is represented by Seth, and agriculture is represented by Osiris. And in that text, or in these texts, you see this conflict between these two ideas. Remember, these are not people, these are ideas, concepts, and they're in conflict with each other. And the nomadic pastoral representative model, is hurting or killing on the agriculture and the development of urbanization in the form of Osiris. In the Bible, they tell the same conflict, but the roles are reversed. It is Cain or Cain who represents agriculture and the and urbanization, and then you have Habel or Abel, and it's from that Habel, that same root is where you get the word Hebrew from. Because these words, Habel, Hebrew, in a syllabic inverse is Arab. These are all dealing with people who move like cattle, who roam. You may know them in other words like Fulani, Bororo, Afar. These are all related groups who migrated in and out of North Africa, coming out of the Middle East into West Africa and so forth. So in there, Abel is the nomadic pastoralist, and Cain is the urbanite agriculturalist. And in each one of these stories, they're trying to inform us through symbolism that this mode of production of these opposite groups are killing our way of life. The Hebrews have been trying to hold on to nomadic pastoralism all throughout the text. And they were even warned not to adopt kingship. They didn't have kings and queens at first. They were warned not to do that, not to be like the other nations. But so this is for me, is beyond priesthood, it's beyond religion.
Mhm.
It's more so having to deal ultimately with economics.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. I think particularly what I'm getting at, I just suspect that the Hebrews of that time, because I recently read Moses and Monotheism, and Freud talks about the story of Moses, and he does a psychoanalysis of that story, and he infers that it was the other way around, that Moses came from nobility and chose to go with the people of lower class, and he also argues in there about the story being told in a certain way because the Hebrews were, from a psychoanalytical perspective, the Hebrews were felt some type of way about potentially killing the priests that came with him. So it's kind of a stretch, but I'm just
I haven't visited that text in so long. That's from my early days when I would read Indian and everything,
right on.
dealing with Egypt, and so I forgot the deeper articulations, because I got to the point where it's like Moses is not a real figure. It's like was wasted, in my opinion, for me, at least at my level of understanding. Which,
Right
of
on.
course, I don't know everything. I'm far from knowing, all that there is to know. But I know I've gotten to the point where I know where I'm wasting my time,
Right on.
and especially dealing with biblical stuff.
Right on.
I'm wasting my time because it's in terms of historicity of biblical events and were these people real and all. It's like this is the Hebrews folklore, and if you understand it from that perspective, you'll be all right. But everybody trying to find, that's not you, but I'm saying I've been in conversations with people trying to find esoteric meaning in this and third eye and that, and you read the Hebrew text upside down and backwards, it's sending you a hidden message. And I'd be like, it's not that serious.
It ain't that deep.
You know.
But you know, it makes perfect sense to me. That's how I look at it. They were a group of you know, their whole text is centered on escaping Africa or escaping Egypt. You know, so in order to do that, you know, they couldn't, of course they would have to espouse some kind of extreme monotheistic, you know, exclusionary kind of doctrine to where, hell no, you're not about to go pay no ties to Amun Ra. That money go to Yahweh. You know what I mean? So that kind of
And
we do this today. Like if you are a hood black nationalist, Pan-African, we don't like nothing Eurocentric. anything associated with Europeans and
it better not even
Eurocentric
look like it came from Czechoslovakia.
You know what I'm saying? It's like, that's a bull. If it looked like it came from Europe, we is on your ass. And so, you know, and I'm speaking as a, you know, I'm not trying to say them. I'm including myself in this group of people. But you know, there's some of us that take it to the extreme. Anything. You know, we don't want to use English letters when typing.
Right.
You know, like it's just anything to deal with Europe, we ain't. So we without even dealing with Hebrews, we like that right now. And it's understandable because it's not about a religious per se priesthood conflict. It's a socio-economic, historical, oppressive conflict. And because white folks that did this to us, F them and they mamas. And we don't want to have nothing to do with them. You know, we create our own. You know, this ain't to the point now. If you know, anything we do can't have any kind of European influence.
Right. Excessive.
You know, and so that's they were just on the extreme of that.
Right on. So I imagine like that, you know, those Akhenaten priests, Aten priests, were probably salty themselves. You know, that's why in my mind, you know, I can see, you know, my enemy's enemy is my friend kind of thing going on. You know what I mean? Yeah.
But then we get into, because you know, I try to keep everything as academic as possible.
Right on.
So when we start talking about, you know, Moses and because then you would have to say that Moses existed, which there's no evidence that there was a Moses, there was no Exodus, there's none of that.
True,
so we can't even tie this to Akhenaten, to, you know, any of this stuff, because none of the biblical stuff is proven to be, you know, a reality. It's folklore.
True indeed.
Right. So, you know, I'm caught myself in a epistemological trap, trying to argue for truth and falsehood at the same time as equals.
True.
And so I don't want to even get into that conversation too much, because then I would have to spend all my time wasting energy trying to prove the biblical stuff existed and that we can actually time it to, you know, events in ancient Egyptian history to prove that reality, to even entertain the idea that they are the way they are because of Akhenaten. You get what I'm saying? Or anything, like, because I would have to align their folklore with our, well, I ain't gonna say our, but with actual Egyptian history. And that's where the conflict for me comes in.
True.
Right.
Yeah, I think what ultimately sparked that in my mind, you know, when you start reading about monotheism, you see a lot of like Abrahamic scholarship that tries to differentiate Akhenaten and his monotheism from the Abrahamic, you know. So trying to basically make the Abrahamic faith unique in that sense, and not, you know, Johnny come lately in a sense.
Yeah,
You know,
we have to be careful, even again by again, I'm an African centered scholar
right on.
who, adheres to methods in Africology. And so we question just the labeling and stuff, because you can fall into these epistemological traps by acquiescing to postulates that are invalid when it comes to African people.
Mm-hmm.
And so this idea of monotheism, like you even have to question that concept.
Right.
It's very true. Very true.
Because as I mentioned in the earlier part of our discussion, when the sister asked a question about spirit and the soul, I had to preference that conversation with this understanding that for a lot of African people, including the ancient Egyptians, the concept of God is existence itself. It is reality itself. It is an infinite existence, it's infinite being.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're talking about monotheism, what is that in that context? God is the only thing that exists. It is the very existence of things, because nothing can exist outside of the infinity.
Right.
Right. So what are you talking about monotheism in comparison to what?
And that understanding gets distributed and filtered through so many levels in African societies. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So it's like, where do you start your measurement? You know what I mean?
True.
Yeah, it's the way that an academician would, or at least an African-centered scholar would approach this is first, making sure that all of the frameworks and the definitions that we're using and applying are valid within the context of African people.
Right on.
Because then they'll try. It's like when a Christian or a Muslim asks me, well, what faith are you? Does the concept of faith even apply in an African context in the way that it does?
Right. Because even in these modern discussions, a lot of times, speaking with people who espouse Abrahamic faith, they'll often try to compare that to ancient Egypt as an example of like African traditions. But even in ancient Egypt, the word for believe is not necessarily the word that's used for these quote unquote spiritual tradition.
Exactly.
The spiritual tradition is known as rek necher. So that's to know God, it's something that you have to discover, not something that you have to trust blindly. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. And I tell folks, like, one of the major differences between, at least that I've been able to ascertain over the years, between the Abrahamic faith and the majority of African wisdom traditions that I'm familiar with, is that the Abrahamic faiths require you to believe, whereas the African wisdom traditions encourage you to discover. And so, that's why it's a conflict when trying to answer the question, well, what faith are you? Or when they try to call, for example, Akhenaten a heretic. How can he be a heretic when that term refers to people who don't believe in Jesus?
Right.
That's how it was used in the Roman times, during the Pope and Catholic. That's what heretic is. So if Jesus wasn't even born yet or conceived of yet, how can Akhenaten have been a heretic? Like that's not even the right term to use in relationship to Akhenaten.
Yeah,
And
that
so,
makes sense. Yeah, it makes me think of like worship, the idea of
yeah,
worship itself. And you kind of miss the nuance when you look at it from an Abrahamic faith. When you're looking at African traditional worldview. The idea of worship to them is something kind of black or white versus
mhm.
worship in African traditions could be something like an acknowledgement. You know,
Even still, it's just reverence. Like
exactly.
like
Yeah.
like is to worship something is to honor. But see, this is where the conflict comes in, because they'd be like, you cannot worship other gods or people or anything to that nature, right? But then the the Bible will be like, honor thy mother and thy father.
Uh huh.
The word worship means to honor someone, something. So, which one is it? Do I worship my parents or do I not?
Exactly.
So it's like, and I don't want to, my intent today was not to start no drama, but
Go on.
it's because we're all fellas on the phone, and I'm pretty sure we've all been in relationships with women, and I'm pretty sure, I'm willing to bet that you have been in a situation where a woman will be upset with you for using a term and then try to substitute it with a synonym of the same term. They just don't like that word in which you're using.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I
Yep.
can almost
Always.
guarantee
Yep.
you, like this is exactly what is happening in this situation. And so, you just get confused, uh, you know, in these spaces without clarification of concepts.
That makes sense. Well, I'm gonna bow out, brothers. I
Uh,
appreciate you, brother, for
no
having me up
doubt,
here and entertaining my thoughts.
no
I'll
doubt, no
catch y'all
doubt.
next one, man.
Glad to have you here. And I don't even know how long we've been on. Oh, we've been on for 3 hours already. So I guess I'll be ending soon.
Yeah.
Anything else you mind while you're here?
That's it, brother. I
All
appreciate you.
right,
I'll catch you on the next one, man.
all right, no doubt.
Peace, peace.
And brother Aziz.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and hop off too. I'm not gonna hold you up.
No doubt, no doubt. Well, I do appreciate. Let me see. I'll try to answer at least 2 more questions. So I'll try to scroll up. So if I skip something, please forgive me. I'm just randomly scrolling and seeing if there's a question or comment that I may have missed. Yep, I agree with this comment. AC1, and yeah, that's that's kind of the bad thing about. I mean, is the curse part of the blessing and the curse of technology is that technology allows many of us to, voice our opinions or to present valuable information that may not be well known, but it also allows for a whole bunch of ignorance to be widespread as well. And it seems like the people who are more ignorant to facts in reality seem to have the most time for some reason to be able to just spread misinformation.
And boldness.
Exactly. So yeah, this is what we strive to do, at least on this channel, and people who I'm affiliated with, is to present you with, some valuable information and resources so that you can further your studies, so that, when these kinds of conflicts come, more lay persons are armed with not only the information but the methods to establish, certain perspectives more so on the line of facts than simply opinion. And so I do appreciate, your comments. And Nasir says, in your opinion, or is there evidence that the Mesoamericans adopt any African words, scripts from Egypt or West Africa? I don't know about any scripts, but if people, in terms of Mesoamericans, in terms of language, I'm pretty sure that they, especially more so along the lines of like Mexico going down into Brazil, that they would have adopted certain terms and concepts coming from Africa. I wouldn't necessarily say Egypt. And the Egypt and Mesoamerican conversation is more so the Ivan van Sertima, and I haven't looked at Ivan van Sertima's work very critically. In my later years, I was introduced to his work in my late teens, early 20s.
That's been coming up a lot with these Aboriginal conversations.
Yeah. So I just haven't, again, like I'm so concentrated on Africa and Africans that I just don't have the time to deal with Mesoamerican history, biblical history. Like it's not as exciting for me personally. I'm not saying that no one should do, but I would hope someone who has a great knowledge of African languages and history and archaeology seriously revisits those texts from Ivan van Sertima and gives us in print an up-to-date analysis and an objective analysis of the central themes that are discussed in those works, because that's what we need. It's, but I'm not sure, outside of I just know modern loan words from African languages like goober and jazz and stuff like that. And there's many more, but I'm just saying, like, it's modern. I don't know too much in terms of like the Native American languages to know what are African loanwords into those languages and when they arrive. So I'm not much help there. Let's see. Akue King says, I missed hearing you at the ASCAC conference. These are definite times to remain visible as you are doing in cyberspace. Stay vigilant during this warfare that someone to ignore. And indeed. Unfortunately, I just, the schedule's conflicted. So I couldn't do it. So I couldn't even watch it. So otherwise, I would have submitted something to present, at the ASCAC conference. So I do appreciate your support and thank you for the encouragement. So it's actually my theory about why African people are so oppressed by their religions. All right. Okay. Well, I don't see anything. AC1 comes back and says, Robin Walker has revisited Dr. Ivan van Sertima's work and pointed out his limitations, but nonetheless, the evidence is still strong. Again, I'll have to review it unless he, has written a new book or some that. And so I've heard many people here and there, respond to this work, but we need a solid text that and not simply an article. We need a good text that re-examines the initial research questions, any new research questions, and the evidences that he had access to, the source material that he drew from, and any extended conversations and rebuttals that he was unable to address during his lifetime. So until that comes out, that's what we need. So we need more folks like you all who are interested in these kind of research questions and conversations to get into the fight, get into the study and produce those works. So y'all know me, I'm gonna be Bantu in ancient Egypt and Yoruba in ancient Egypt all day until I die, right? But I can't do it all. So I'm trying not to be a super African and write about everybody and everyone's history.
I hear you.
That's why we need y'all to get an area of focus and produce that work for us, and I'll be more than happy to read it. But any last words before we go?
No, just peace to the fam, and thanks for having me up. I always enjoy your presentations and your breakdowns of information.
Indeed.
Okay.
And thank you for coming on, and thank all of our guests who came on, and thank all of you in the chat who have made yourselves known and participated in the conversation with your questions and comments. I do appreciate you all. And so hopefully the next time you see me, it'll be a more organized presentation. And I look forward for then. So until then, y'all have a blessed week. And until next time, peace.